sometimes I think that when women are trying to usurp authority and control over situations, especially in the context of family, I don't think that it's always kind of a mean-spirited or evil thing. There might be some women who really do just want to wield power and authority over men, but a lot of the time we find ourselves guilty of trying to usurp authority because we're trying to help. Like it's genuinely coming from a good place, from good intentions, and yet the result that it produces is that we are taking the reins from our husbands. Hey everybody, it's Busy Mark and I am back with another video, but before we begin, I am pleased to announce that The Modest Fitting has officially launched, a women's clothing boutique offering skirts and dresses that embody modesty, femininity, and beauty. To learn more about dresses like this one and others available for purchase, head over to themodestfitting.com. But without further ado, let's begin. Hey everybody, I am back, and this time I'm going to be doing a book review on an older book. It's called Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. It's an older book, but I did have a chance to read through it all, and I thought it was a really good read, so much so that I wanted to kind of do, I'm not going to say a chapter by chapter review, but just some of the highlights that I saw throughout the book. If you're interested in reading along with me, I recommend that you get the book. You can buy it secondhand for a few bucks. It's not super expensive. But the premise of the book is to help specifically like married men and married women understand their partners better. The premise, the title kind of gives you the idea of how the book is set up, and it's the best way to try to communicate with and relate to your husband or your wife, but we're women, so to your husband, is to really look at him as if he is a being from another planet. If we just accept from the very onset that men and women are fundamentally different in the way that we think, in the way that we emote, in the way that we behave, if we can just level set there, that whatever is true for you may not necessarily be true for your partner, this book is essentially asserting that understanding alone can undercut a lot of the conflict that we have in marriage. And so his suggestion is, think of your husband as a man from Mars, and that you're a woman from Venus, and that you don't even speak the same language, and that to communicate, you have to kind of understand how to translate the actions, the behavior, the words, the gestures, the facial expressions of the other person to kind of understand what they're trying to say. He says that most women will complain that their husbands don't listen, or that they'll listen for a little while and literally just long enough to assess the basic facts and offer a solution. Allegedly, this is something that bothers a lot of women. And actually, I shouldn't say allegedly, it's something that I experience as well, but I quite appreciate the solution-oriented nature of my husband, such that when I am coming to him with a problem, I really am looking for a solution. But I think what the author is getting at here is there can be times when a way that a woman kind of processes through how she's feeling and getting past negative emotions is oftentimes by talking them out. And so a man who is not understanding that will cut that process short by offering solutions, but the solution is not necessarily what's going to make the situation better. Her talking through it so that she can get past the emotions is. And so he says that that's the major complaint of most women. And then he said for most men, the complaint is that women are always trying to change them, and they're usually trying to change the men in the name of helping him. He calls it women operating in the home improvement committee capacity. And he said women oftentimes don't understand how badly unsolicited advice, suggestions, and help sound on the receiving end for a man, primarily because he says that most women think that they're nurturing the man, but he feels controlled. Instead, he just wants her acceptance. And he was like, part of understanding this is recognizing that most men get a sense of feeling like a man, feeling their own, feeling secure within themselves is through achievement and success. And so even if it's something small, like driving somewhere and he clearly needs help with directions, that small feat of being counted competent to get to the destination is something that can weigh on a man's feeling like a man. And when a woman unknowingly, in a very loving way, says, hey, let me help you, and she may start offering suggestions, that unsolicited advice and that unsolicited help, he receives it as a vote of lack of confidence. We would say a vote of confidence. So a vote of a lack of confidence in his ability to accomplish things, which makes him feel like less of a man, even if we're talking about something as small like getting to a party, or not asking for directions, or walking around Home Depot and not asking for help about where a certain item is. Most men will get their sense of feeling like a man from their ability to achieve things and accomplish things and to have success on their own. And so when outside forces like an unsuspecting wife tries to come in and help him, or give him suggestions, or offer constructive criticisms without him having asked for it, it feels like she's essentially communicating, I have assessed the situation and you have come up lacking. And so that was something that was really helpful for me, because I've always thought of myself as someone who is going to help, and I'm just trying to help, and I'm just trying to offer some suggestions. And the thing is there's actually nothing, that this author is alleging that there's nothing wrong with doing that, but it's best for a woman to wait for a man to ask her for her input, as opposed to a woman just thrusting it on the man. He said this can really be understood even amongst men. He's like, men understand other men. And so a man will not offer help or suggestion to another man without him asking it, because it's an unspoken code. It's an unspoken understanding that to impose help on another man is actually him saying that he finds some weakness in him, that he finds some lack in him. He's like, interestingly, when women have an issue, we will jump in, we'll say, well, how about you try this? Maybe consider this. That's how we love each other. But a man, the way that men express love to other men when they're trying to encourage them and support them, is they'll say things like, you'll figure it out. It'll all work out. You got this. You can do this. Like, that's how men express love and support to other men, is not by offering help, not by offering suggestion, but by giving a vote of confidence that you got this, you will figure it out. And they don't even help. Like, that's how they help. They help by saying, you will be able to figure this out on your own. That was an eye-opening kind of notion for me, because it's just so opposite to the way that I, and likely a lot of women, think. When we have friends that have issues, our first thought is to kind of brainstorm together potential solutions to the problem. And that's not necessarily how men operate, and it's not the way that men do not respond well to women taking that approach with them, because they're not women, they're a man. And so I thought that was really interesting. Again, going back to the analogy of men being from Mars and women from Venus, the author was saying that in Mars, amongst Martians, he says, asking for help when you can do it yourself is perceived as a sign of weakness. And then I added, this is why men don't ask for help. And so that's something that if women could just bear that in mind, if we could understand that men have been designed, wired, and just have a natural inclination to want to achieve things, to do things, to accomplish things on their own, it will help us better support them. I remember when I was reading The Proper Care and Feeding of Husbands, I think I have referenced that book probably 1,000 times, because it is still to this day probably the most effective book I have ever read on how wives are to relate to their husbands. She said again and again that one of the most important things a wife can do for her husband is to offer him acceptance. That's ultimately what this man is getting at. He says, where does he say it here? The way that this author talked about it, he said, the next time the man was lost, instead of offering help, she restrained herself. The man, the husband, greatly appreciated her warm acceptance and trust. They're using the same language. He's calling it acceptance and trust. In the Proper Care Feeding of Husbands, she just called it acceptance. What it ultimately is getting at, which I think doesn't come naturally to me or to most women, is that we have to leave enough room for the man to be able to try to solve the problem in the way that it occurs to him to solve it. I think that we as women, like this book is talking about, we have such an inclination that the way that we love each other is by anticipating the needs of someone and offering that help, offering that suggestion even before asked. Like, that's how we relate to one another. But with men, the most loving thing is to step back, leave enough room for them to try to figure things out on themselves and to not criticize them as they are in the process of trying to figure it out. He's calling it acceptance and trust. The other author called it acceptance. I'm saying really stepping, like remaining in our lane and not trying to veer over into their lane of problem solving and even leadership. It's really easy for us to do that. And sometimes I think that when women are trying to usurp authority and control over situations, especially in the context of family, I don't think that it's always kind of a mean-spirited or evil thing. There might be some women who really do just want to wield power and authority over men, but a lot of the time we find ourselves guilty of trying to usurp authority because we're trying to help. Like it's genuinely coming from a good place, from good intentions, and yet the result that it produces is that we are taking the reins from our husbands and trying to literally make them do the thing we think should be done for the purposes of coming about to the solution. But that's one, not what the Bible calls us to do. And even though this man is not a believer, he's also saying not only is it just not the right thing, it's ineffective. It backfires. It doesn't actually encourage the man to be a man. It has a deflating effect on his desire and even his ability to be an effective man. And I just think it makes me think about how, God designed men and women differently and how he suited us for the roles that he called us to occupy. He has called men to be the leaders of their wives and to lead their families. And it would make sense then that he gave the man an extreme desire to want to be able to be an independent problem solver, a leader, effective to achieve and to succeed and to actually produce results. Like, it makes sense that God designed them that way. And I think that we as women would do well to understand that that's their design and to leave room for them to work out the design that God indeed did give them. And the best way that we can do that is by holding back suggestions, corrections, criticism until we are asked for it. Because I think that there is something to be said about, like, as wives, we have been called to be helpmeets. And so we are here to help. But I believe it's best to offer the help when the help is asked for. Because when you start offering suggestions and criticism and it's unsolicited, it starts to feel like control. And that's something that's even outside of marriage. Even in friend-to-friend relationships, sometimes unsolicited advice, unsolicited help, unsolicited suggestions are usually really poorly received because they will even get the response of, who even asked you? Like, you get what I'm saying? Like, so I think that there's something to be said about, especially in our marriages, we are called to be helpmeets. We are called to be a help to our husband, but let's give him the opportunity to ask us for the help. Let's give him an opportunity to solicit the help as opposed to us pushing it on him. Anyway, so that was just a quick overview of just the first 2 chapters. What do you guys think of the notion of thinking of a man as a Martian and a woman from Venus? For me, while it's pretty, like, we've all heard the saying, men are from Mars, women are from Venus, but actually the way that he took time to set up how, no, seriously, men and women are so different that they might as well be different species because we approach even the same task with such different perspectives and with such different approaches that unless we have this common understanding that we are fundamentally different, it's going to increase needless conflict, unnecessary fighting and arguments that over time can really wear down the bond in a marriage. But if you've read this book, let me know what you think. If you haven't read it, I recommend that you pick it up and maybe we can go through it together. I have already finished the entire book and it was a good read. It was worth reading. But as always, thank you for tuning in and I will see you next time.